big topics, big ideas, and practical policy solutions. This is Leaders on the Frontier with your host, David Lease.
It's September 22nd, 2022, and welcome to Leaders on the Frontier, where we tackle big topics, big ideas, and solutions to better serve you Canadians. My name is David Lease, and I'm your host, and welcome. Our topic today is about civil society, and what is civil society, and should we care? Today we'll be having an extraordinary conversation with an extraordinary leader who has multiple hats within that realm of civil society. But first, I'd like to do a little bit of a setup. Culture matters in society. Indeed, it's been said that culture is upstream to policy. In other words, that our culture, the way that we behave and interact with each other, including civil society, shapes what is possible in the area of policy. And that's why every Canadian needs to care deeply about it, because it determines ultimately the kind of country Canada will become. So the context that we often at Frontier look through the world is through kind of classical liberalism. I don't mean by a political party. I mean a way of looking at society through a number of key elements that values the rights of individuals and freedoms, minimizing coercion of the state or government. We take a stance of toleration to a variety of points of view. We have the idea that it's important to have a limited and representative government. And we believe in the rule of law, open economic markets, and property rights, to name a few. So what's the point? The point is that these things are all undergirded by the foundation of what we call civil society. So civil society, or culture, matters. In fact, it's been critical to the success of Western civilization, let alone our country. So in that context, what is the state of civil society today? How is one way to look at it? I want to take a very involved leader within the Canadian landscape to help us discuss and reflect on this and these related questions with an extraordinary leader in Canada, but also internationally. He's someone who wears, quite frankly, many different leadership hats, whether it's in the church, which is part of obviously civil society and association, charity, policy, media, and business. He's in a unique spot to offer a perspective on these different elements. So on that note, I would like to introduce our guest, Leon Fontaine. Welcome, Leon.
It's great to be with you, David.
Well, great to see you. You have, it's quite amazing, your background and your story. But I'd like to get your help a little bit in terms of looking at our discussion from a lot of angles. But I'd first like to begin with a reference to your own story. Where did Leon Fontaine come from, and how did you become involved in so many different leadership positions?
I was raised in a home with two pastors in a little town in Saskatchewan, Weldon, Saskatchewan. And my parents were so real, so authentic, so transparent, and their look at the Bible was very cool. And I didn't know that churches had such a judgmental look at the world and others, because I was raised in this wonderful environment of loving people the way they are, accepting people the way they are, forgiving one another instantly, and just enjoying one another, even if we completely believed differently. And so out of that came a love for the Bible as a book that could help the human condition in developing culture, law, in this ability to love each other, put up with each other. And so it just radically changed my life. But everywhere I went, people didn't get it, including Christians, pastors. So
Wow.
I went on a whole different, not different, but I went on a whole different passion to help people see the beauty of what's in there.
Wow. No, no, it's fascinating. And, it reminds me of how our own civilization, I'm referring to the West, and particularly in the Anglo-Saxon tradition, has so many rich Judeo-Christian values in it. And in many ways, we're not even conscious of it or aware of it. But I can really relate to your upbringing. It sounds like a very rich, positive, kind of loving environment.
Yeah, it sure was.
So I want to just talk briefly. You wear so many hats in terms of senior leadership. You are involved in major organizations, not just in Canada, but internationally. And I want to just pause for a moment and talk a little bit about leadership. How would you define the core elements of leadership?
I think depending on what area that you're looking at, it can be moved a little, but leadership, in my mind, is the ability to lead people. Much of what we learn about leadership today is the looking down into the organization. And so, good management, good administration is crucial, but that tends to be what is being taught in what we call leadership. But
Mhm.
leadership is the ability, first of all, to get up and take the organization somewhere, take the country somewhere, etc., and then be able to paint this vision, to have a purpose, to strategize the big picture, and then to be able to put, uh, smaller goals and time frames on it. And you can get so caught up in the details in the bush that you forget where you're going. And so leadership is just this. I remember one time chatting with an older gentleman about this. He was a guy who would travel around the world and advise and work with corporations. And he was a Christian. And so I asked him, I said, do you think leadership is something anybody can learn? Or do you think that people are
Mm.
born with a leadership gift? And he was kind of quiet for a minute. And then, as a Christian, this was his answer. He said, well, of course, all of us must add skills to our gifts. But he said, according to the Bible, he said that God puts gifts within us
Mm.
in our mother's womb, according to Psalms 139. But he said many do not develop skills around their gifts, and so it goes unused. And anyway, that was my first look at leadership and how I walked it out.
Well, that's fascinating. So if you relate, and I know this sounds like an overworked word, but it is a profound significance. If you use the word excellence, how does that relate to leadership?
I think excellence is something that so many people weren't shown maybe or born with, and they think perfection is excellence. But in leadership, perfection kills people, destroys them. It creates this almost attitude of being critical that no one can live up to. But excellence is this ongoing drive that says we're going to do it to the best of our ability now, knowing that in a year we'll have more resources, we'll have better people, we'll know what we're doing, and we're going to continue to do it with excellence. I mean, what's interesting is that the Bible calls God excellent, that this spirit of excellence comes from God himself.
Interesting. So speaking of excellence, and I have not told you this before, Leon, but I listen to obviously a lot of speakers. I don't know how many I've listened to, but I would say you're among the best speakers I've ever heard.
Mm,
And
thank
there's
you.
reasons why I say that, but you have an incredible ability to engage the audience and communicate. And how do you
Mm.
look at public speaking like that? Because I know that's a big part of one of your gifts that you exercise.
You know, going to church all my life, as a little kid, I would watch the speakers who came in and spoke.
Hmm.
And church is an interesting thing because by the church, I mean the actual services, is because a pastor's got to get up there and speak to an audience, minimum of once a week. Many of us do it 6 times a week or more. And you have to have content. You got to keep people interested. And while I was a young guy, I would watch my dad, my mom, the men and women they brought in, and I literally began to just look at it and go, if you would do this, I'd enjoy you more. You're boring. You'd have no voice inflection. And then I'd watch people with real passion, but too much. And then I'd watch people with body language and the way. And I just began to study this sitting in the pew. And I just thought, we have this amazing message, but the messengers sure need help. And that's kind of where I began to look at, how can I say this? Who's my audience? And so I read book after book on it, and presentation, how to use humor because I felt like I was called to communicate with people. And I felt like everybody I talked to felt they were really good. And I just thought, I'm probably the same way. I probably think I'm good at this, but I need to keep getting better and better and asking for help. And so that's been an ongoing life goal for me, is to keep getting better and better at taking the thoughts that I have and communicating them. And of course, your words are, what do they say, 7% of everything.
Well, that's fascinating. It's interesting, and we're going to get into some of these angles as a leader. Now, it's fascinating. You began as a paramedic, and I know that was a significant life-changing perspective for you. And now you are the CEO of the Miracle Channel, and we'll talk about that a little bit. You're the lead pastor with your wife, Sally, at Springs Church that has campuses. It's one of the fastest growing churches in the country. So it's fascinating when you think of that background as a paramedic. How did that shape your life today?
It had a massive impact on me, because going on a call, on an ambulance call, you never knew what you're walking into. Multiple casualties, babies, parents, people pinned, needing jaws of life. Someone dies on a rooftop, CPR, get them on a back. It was absolutely challenging. But the thing that really impacted me was their training that would cause me to walk into something that overwhelmed me emotionally, but to stay absolutely calm. And if you don't, then you will make a mistake at maximizing survivors.
Wow.
You will move with your emotions, and it'll cost people their lives. And so the training that I got there, and then riding third, making you go into some of the most horrific accident scenes. People are screaming at you to do something to them, but yet their injury is nowhere near as crucial as the other three. So you leave them there screaming. And I learned to follow a systematic way of looking at an accident scene, for example, and not being moved by emotion, but being able to, with accuracy, we call it triage. And I like the word triage, to quickly just zero in. And so they taught me systems of how to control an accident scene that I began to apply to business. And I mean, the guy that was screaming was doing good. He had an airway, he was breathing, he was conscious, he had circulation. The second he's screaming at me, he covered most of my first things to investigate. So I went to the silent people. And so you went to screamers pretty much last. But most leaders don't know that one thing. They go to screamers first.
Yeah. So this is a fascinating analogy, isn't it? That type of insight and methodology that you're referring to, of triage, for the life of any organization, let alone a country.
Yes.
Is that right?
I would travel a lot around the world and help people with organizations. And I would just ask them things, simple things like, you want more growth, whether it's financial, whether it's people, whether it's staffing. There's about 9 areas that I think that in talking with someone they needed to grow in. But I would say, what are your top 3 or 4 problems? And they never knew. Almost never knew. They might be able to grab one thing that they felt was a problem, but there was such a lack of awareness of looking at the organization and being able to pinpoint it. Now, they would just try to manage things better. But in my mind, I kind of break leadership down to like this. There's leadership, Then there's, and that is taking the organization somewhere. Then there's management, which is a leadership gift that needs to change the structures of management. And then the administration is where you would carry out the management structures. And I just found that they would continually tweak management and completely miss something that was huge, that was hurting them. But they felt the better for always changing, but the changes were too small.
Isn't that fascinating? So can you tell us more then about your take on teamwork and organizational culture and how important that is?
I think one of the definitions of leadership as well is the ability to work through others. And if you can do that well, you can run multiple organizations. You can do things that most people are having a nervous breakdown because they think leadership is having a lot of assistance. So, but then you still have to dole out, think through, problem solve, etc. But the only way to raise up something great is to raise up the leaders around you, so that if they were department heads or it's a C-suite or whatever you're working with, you want them to rise up and to think on their own. I love the fact that I would say everybody that I have in a leadership area around me is better than me and knows more than me in the area that they're in. And it kind of, my analogy would be a professional sports team, that a football coach is the worst runner, the worst quarterback, the worst blocker, the least in shape, and nowhere near the talent that he has on the field. But that coach is excellent at taking all that talent and working it together if they respect him. And so that's one great analogy of people who want to be leaders, is this ability that around you are pretty amazing people if we'll believe in them. And as you give them responsibility, for outcomes, you also have to begin to dole out the authority so that they learn to use both.
Exactly. Wow, what a great analogy. And I love it the way you're really challenging everyone to think about leadership at all levels and how to nurture other leaders.
Even in parenting, people say, well, everyone's not called to be a leader. See, I would disagree with that. If a mom wants to raise amazing children, or a dad, then there's different levels of leadership. The first level of leadership is positional leadership, where I'm the boss, you listen to me. Now that's parenting for a lot of people. But in organizations, you quickly want to move to second level leadership, where people like you being the leader and you have an influential leadership, where people love to get around you, want to get around you, you inspire, you coach, you believe. And if parents don't get to that, probably in the pre-teens, where your child literally sees you as such an advantage, and then that child will have no respect for their parents. Their parents are no longer leading. They've lost leadership to the friends, a teacher, a coach. So you could literally use a lot of this great teaching on leadership in every area of life. Lead your kids, lead your family.
No, it's so exciting. And I just love those insights or pearls of wisdom as they apply in so many situations, as certainly as we reflect on our nation. So I'd like to make that shift then to the question about the importance of civic duty, or dare I say democratic engagement. Our society has a real mix of people. Some are not engaged at all. Some are very much engaged. But how do you see it from your point of view, given your Christian faith and perspective? Should we be engaged in civic society, and why?
I think in order to answer that, we have to go to the definition of church, believe it or not, because it has completely changed since the time of Jesus. When they used the word church in the New Testament, it was the word ecclesia, which meant the people who follow Christ. Today, when you use the word church, you will mean an organizational structure sitting in a building which has a denominational name on the top, and they meet for spiritual reasons, to teach the word, to pray with people. And so when we talk about the church, we literally would be talking about across Canada. So the church, we would be talking about just people who follow Christ, people who love his principles for living. And so, yes, absolutely. I mean, it's crucial. I was reading an article the other day about, when the war in the States and the freedom that was brought to the African American that was brought over, and how that the organizations that were at the forefront were always usually half pastors.
Mm-hmm.
And today, just me doing some of the shows that I do, pastors, a lot of them are freaking out, coming against me. We shouldn't be political. And I'm actually not espousing a political party. I'm actually just dealing with issues that the Bible deals with, and I have to speak up on. Even when it came to the Underground Railroad, from what I've read in research, the entire Underground Railroad were followers of Christ,
that's right,
who were bringing them from the States up into Canada. So now to have so many pastors duck their head and try to be quiet and just preach to the choir about, love Jesus, pray, everything's going to be all right. That is not what the Word of God is taught.
Okay.
We are the salt and the light, which means when we enter society as followers of Christ, and we love people, which means to value them, we honor them, we love them the way they are. We call it LAF, L-A-F. We love them the way they are. We accept them the way they are. When they hurt us, we forgive them for what's going on. They feel such value because they don't know where to go for their value. And this value that comes from Christ is to come through his church. Every person following Christ as a born-again believer, everywhere they go. So whether you're in business, whether you're in politics, whether you are in healthcare, everywhere you go, you should stand up and speak up, but you should always speak truth in love is one of the principles. You always stand for truth. You always speak for truth, but you do it in a way that does not devalue the people, the person that you're speaking to.
So in that way, that's interesting, that sense of history of not only the pioneering role that so many Christian leaders had in getting rid of slavery, like I think of Wilberforce and the like that you mentioned, the Underground Railway, but also that is a challenge then to current leaders of faith or any background, really, to say how are they engaged in the democratic process. So in that context, then, as a leading Christian leader, how do you then view your involvement in civic society, given that Canada has people of many different faiths or no faith at all? Everybody technically, from a philosophical point of view, has faith, even if you don't believe in a deity. But how do you see then the church's role in that kind of multi-faith society?
Well, most religions can have a very aggressive role. If you go to the countries where these religions are, you'll have no choice but to do what they say, in every area. But Christianity, not as a religion, but as people of the way is what they were called in the New Testament. It just meant the people who followed Christ. They had such a respect for those who didn't believe the way they believed.
Mm-hmm.
They had such a respect, and they valued so greatly the people that were around them that they would give their lives to love and to rescue them. Whereas today, religion has kind of taken over, where we want people to believe the way we believe. And if you don't believe the way we believe, we can't be friends.
Mm-hmm.
And that's much of the way religion goes. And so when I look at our society, okay, let's go straight to pastoring. That might help people sort through this. As I pastor this church, I don't get political, because I've got people in our church, I'm sure, on a journey of learning, growing. They're in all different parties for different reasons as to how they were raised. And so what I teach them is leadership. I teach them biblical thinking. How do we value people? How we care? And as you teach this way, that the people that trust you as their pastor and sit in your church are raised up with wisdom and knowledge and understanding. They know how to break down problems and issues. And so when they see something that is wrong, that's going to hurt people, they can rise up. But they don't rise up through me. My role as a pastor is to equip them with the incredible biblical principles that have built great countries over the years, that have helped establish, people's families for generations. So within my church, I've got people that are rising up in politics and in healthcare, rising up in arts, entertainment, rising up in education. But as they learn the principles of God's word and this human condition, the human race, they are so well trained that as they go into all these areas, they become salt and light, the Bible calls it. Meaning light, meaning aha moments as leaders speak up and share their perspective wherever they are. And they are salt, which means they add flavor in, they add wisdom in such a way that it prolongs society, it helps society. And along with all their ideas, wherever they are working as a follower of Christ, is this amazing value that people are worth something. They're incredibly valuable. And so this helps us to get involved. So as a pastor, I don't get involved for them, with them. We're not starting all these groups to attack anything. I'm just teaching people, because sitting amongst our congregation are all these gifts and abilities that need to learn. And then as they go to school and university, become doctors, lawyers, whatever they're taking, this value system and these principles of how the world works has a stunning impact on them. And so to me, that would be a fast look at how I would see us.
It's a fascinating summary from your perspective as a leader, because as I reflect on my own understanding of the history and underpinnings of classical liberalism, again, I don't mean a party, I mean a way of thinking about how to build a better society. You can see why Judeo-Christian values then have kind of infused that foundational culture of Canada, where we have a tolerance, we have shared values of working together as a community, a respect for individual rights and freedoms, but also a genuine care for individuals, because we would see them historically, at least we saw every individual as precious, as an image bearer, made in the image of God. And I think so it's very much interrelated to what you just said.
Yeah, when you look at history, and there's a great book out there that the author has passed away, but it was simply called "What If Jesus Had Never Been Born?" And it's all about the massive impact he's had on civil society, country after country after country, and hospitals, and looking after the poor and the hurting.
Exactly.
And people have this kind of thinking that, before Christ, or back when they think life was simpler and we all lived in tents on these beautiful prairies and we shot buffalo, or we gathered and everything was wonderful and we got along. But history does not tell us that. It was brutal, serving gods that had to do human sacrifices. And life was so cheap that in Greece and in Rome and the Romans, when you go back to the time of Christ, a man was allowed to kill any child. If it was his, he was allowed to kill his own wife. No value. If you didn't want your baby, you set it on the wall of the city, or you'd have places to leave it for the animals. And so the Christians, when they first began to follow Jesus Christ, would go gather up all these babies and raise them in orphanages. If a person was sick, they would literally wall them off in their house because they didn't want the plague. Everything was a plague. They would walk into the home knowing they were here to die, and they would look after those people. It was the kind of value for human life that absolutely stunned and changed society back then. And you can track and I love the way this guy brings it out. You can track the impact that Jesus had in what he said, what he taught, the value of others on society, and where we are today.
So that truly was a revolution of sorts then,
Yeah.
as we really put a much higher value on every individual as precious, and a tolerance for others. Um, Now, I find it very interesting. You have said on occasion you hate religion.
Yeah.
You hate religion. So I think people will be surprised to hear that. What do you mean by
Well, I think I need to clarify that because, yeah,
that?
Jesus, I'll put it this way. Jesus came to this earth to end all religions and give every person a personal access to Father God. So when you track religions back through the years, and whether it's God or the gods or millions of gods like in Hinduism, or Zeus and the Greeks and all these things, it's these people trying to please the gods, sacrificing to the gods. In fact, child sacrifice was so common, people don't like talking about it, it's so gross. But oh man, it was, people were trying to please the gods, change the gods, win them back. The gods were so fickle, for example, in Greece, that it didn't matter what you did, they could change their minds. And then there's all these names. So religion, to me, by definition, is people trying to please God so he helps them. And then you could take that everywhere. But when Jesus came, he very clearly came to give a person who had lost this ability to fellowship with God, to give them access to God, this peace that passes all human understanding, a joy that is something unspeakable and not even tied to the things going on in your world. It was an internal peace and an internal joy, where the world had an external peace and an external joy. And so when we talk about Jesus, and I don't even like using the word Christianity because it's just become, in most cases, another religion. So Jesus didn't come to the planet to die for us and to take our sins and to take the curse, to create a bigger and a better religion.
Mhm,
He
mhm.
came to end all religions. And then every individual person could know the joy and the peace of Father God. And the Bible calls him Father God. He's not CEO God. He's not called the General God. It's not Boss God. Something very family, Father God.
That's
And
fascinating.
it's profound when you really look at how much religion has destroyed people, and people living in such guilt and condemnation and such shame. Even the Bible will be used in a religious way to attack people in what they're doing. You're a sin, you're a sinner, it's sin, you're a sinner. So that even Christians live in such often shame, because they've got the Bible wrong,
Mhm.
that they live their whole lives never able to use their gifts and ability because they're sure that God is allowing sickness on them, stealing their baby. We use terms like act of God for floods that kill 250,000 people, a twister that comes in and destroys and sucks babies out of things. Then we just say, that's God. I mean, one of the great columnists years ago, I read it out of Toronto, said the reason I'm an agnostic or an atheist is because the Christianity says God is a God of love and God is in control. And he said those thoughts don't go together when you see the incredible chaos, death, and suffering that is around the world. And he's right. Religion has said all these things, and it's just not an accurate look at what the Bible is saying.
Exactly. So I think that's a very important distinction. And so what would you say then is, in this case, the role of the church then in civic society? Is there a way that you look at that then?
Yeah, I think that it depends on who you're looking from. If you're looking at it from our perspective as the church, and then remind me to come from the perspective of civil society,
Yeah.
Jesus very clearly tells us to share the good news with people. And the
Mhm.
good news is that God isn't mad at you. God has forgiven all your sin, that God is not allowing curses on you. That the good news is that this vertical relationship between you and God was paid for by Jesus, his son, and you are now qualified to be in his family with all the inheritance that goes with it. That would be really cramming, this good news. And so, and when we tell people that who maybe are stuck in a religion, including Christianity, where it's fear and it's competition and it's fighting and all the rest, the message is stunning because you're of great value and you get to come as you are, as messed up or as perfect, and he accepts you the way you are. There's nothing you have to do to earn this beautiful free gift that's been given. So as a church, as people who follow Christ, everywhere we go, we don't pound people, we don't harp on people. Our life should be the best look at it. Like everywhere I go, I witness. And sometimes I use words, but people will ask. And so that's a sense of us sharing this beautiful relationship that we have. But then when you look at society, when you have people who read the Bible and the 10 Commandments, which are just stunning and amazing, when you flesh these things out, you could speak for hundreds of hours on how respect for someone, respecting their family, respecting their bank accounts, respecting all that they have, it lays the groundwork for a stunning society. I was catching a ride in a cab with a young gentleman who was of another religion and had just moved to Canada, and he was just talking a mile a minute about his religion and why it was so good, and that we misunderstand it as Canadians, and that we are all chasing the same God, blah blah blah. And so I just listened to him, really nice man, and I just said to them, well, then why aren't you back at home in your country where your religion is predominant? And all of a sudden his brain just kind of clicked. And he goes, no. I said, well, then why did you move to Canada? And he said, the opportunities that I have. He says, the protection of my wife and my children, and the protection of property and I'm saying it in much more, a long conversation. But he wanted his property, his bank accounts, his wife, his children, what he was working for, the kind of life he wanted. This was why he was here. And I said, actually, all that you value is taught within the Judeo-Christian principles in the Bible. And so if you look at most of the greatest countries of the world today, you will see that they are founded on the 10 Commandments, the legal principles, the cultures of the Bible. They didn't just come out of nowhere. And so that's why I feel like, and then I'll take a pot shot at Christians for a minute. I have a real problem with religious Christians who get up on the air and point fingers at people and say, you got to stop that sin. Who do you? And I'm kind of going like, oh man, it's just like, give me a break. We're not trying to make a Christian country. By that I mean where people are manipulated and forced and looked down upon until they find the principles and the ideals of Jesus. So it's just this one, massive push to get everybody there. And you'll see it in other countries and other religions. And so Christians sometimes think that trying to judge people and look at them, actually, Jesus said, don't judge people. You accept them the way they are, and you value them, and you work with them, and you love them and appreciate them so that they really sense this towards them before they make all the changes you feel they should make. So when we go at the world from religious church perspectives with guns a-blazing, you sinners, you're going to hell, and this is wrong, and that's wrong, and that's wrong, it doesn't create. In fact, much of what Christianity is getting today back from the public is because Christianity as a religion has been just harping on them in every way, pointing at all their sins and the things they don't like. And so that's not what Jesus intended.
Yeah. So that's quite powerful, because you're really challenging people of Christian faith, or really any other faith for that matter, to say, how do you invite people to a discussion around things that matter and wisdom? It's really a positive approach rather than kind of a negative brow.
David, I'll just, because we're on this topic, I'll just say one other thing. There's a portion of scripture in the Bible, I believe it's in Isaiah, where God is speaking and he says this, "Who can I send? Who will go?" And he outlines, what he needs done. God is not a despot. He's not controlling. Those two phrases shows you the heart of God, that every human being walking on the planet is never forced to go anywhere, never made to adapt to anything, never forced, coerced, manipulated. In fact, he's asking and he just goes, "Who will go? Who can I send?"
Interesting.
And that's the heart of God. He's given us such an autonomy. He's given us such freedom as the human race that if we do not choose him, we are protected from him. In other words, he's not going to do anything to you all the way to your grave. Now, the thing that is interesting is that he knows all the principles to live the good life that you want. And and when you make decisions, every decision's got consequences. But yet, as God, he still loves and values people and tries to win them in the midst of all this, but will never touch this freedom, will never touch the fact that they're created in his likeness and image, and they have the freedom to make their own choices. Now, that's not all across the board, because the Bible's got other things that talk about if you become a weapon against another person, that's different. But
so let's just pick up on that, because you mentioned freedom then. So this is a very important assumption that undergirds, I would argue, classical liberalism, because it's so linked to Judeo-Christian values, and that is the word freedom. So freedom doesn't come from the state, as some ideologies suppose, but it actually comes from God. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah, exactly. When you look at the very beginning, the book of Genesis, it says to the human race through Adam the first, it says to go into the world, to multiply, to have dominion, to spread out, to do all these things. And so a human being made in the likeness and image of God has all of these abilities. But you'll notice nowhere in the Bible does that include other people that you are to have dominion over. To rule and reign. But now when it comes to, in that grove of trees, God hid a house made out of wood and beautiful furniture. In that ore, in that mountain, he knew that men would be discovering all these different metals and things to make chips and you name it. He placed it all here for us to discover and find. And there's something that you said, I heard you speak about once, where you said that freedoms are wonderful, but they often bump up against each other.
That's right.
And I felt that was well said, that I'm a free individual, but I've not been placed on this planet to mess with the freedoms of another person. Herein lies the complexity of modern government, law, culture, etc.
No, it's a fascinating discussion, because if you think of the history then, even for people that did not believe in, quote, explicit a divine creator, namely God, there's the belief in what is referred to as natural law, the sense that there are things that are self-evident, e.g. that we were born free, and that these our freedom was given to us inherently, but not from the state. And I think that that's a really significant kind of divide in terms of worldviews here that is changing in our civic society. Do you have that same sense that there's people who believe that our rights come from the state versus the assumption that they come from the divine or natural law?
Yeah, I think that, like, when you look at creativity as an example, the more free people are, the more creative they become. Now, the word Elohim, which is one of the words for God, literally means the great creative spirit. So we're made in the likeness and the image of God. And where people can begin to walk in freedom, their creativity to solve problems in healthcare, problems in transportation, problems in raising children, problems in education, problems in all these things. People are such creative beings that where you where you see that they were created free. And when that freedom is supported, allowed, and celebrated, that person will add to society stunning things, whether it's being creative in medicines or being creative in transportation, so that you can now see your children who live 3 countries away every month because it's gotten so cheap to hop on a plane and do that. And so within all of these human beings, when we, when we take people's freedoms away and people are sitting there just trying to enjoy what little bit of freedom they have, there's not this just breath of fresh air that now I have my freedoms, I don't have to fight for them, and now I can use the gifts and the abilities that are in me. But the thing is that one of the things I see going on around the world today is everybody wants security. And so we want to be secure. We want the government to protect us, to stop people from doing that. And the more security you want from a group, meaning the government or whoever you're giving your security to, the more your freedoms you have to give up. Look at the President of the United States. To keep him safe and secure, he has to give up a ton of his freedoms. He can't drive. He can't go anywhere alone. He can't just decide to go on holidays. The things we enjoy, they want to keep him so secure. He knows that when I become the president, that he has to give up everything that he values. And the same is true for a Canadian that goes, I want this, I want that. And we keep wanting the government to do all these things. Whereas in other countries like Africa, for example, South Africa, I've got friends there, there's much less security. And they like the freedoms, and they'll look after themselves to a great degree. And then they come to Canada, and many of the South African people that I'm speaking with, they just can't believe how much red tape, and I mean, your children and what the government's saying about them and doing about them, and your money and the taxation. And it's just like this complexity of everyday life because we want security. We're afraid. I think that's a big issue for a lot of people.
Okay, so I really, really appreciate that kind of self-awareness that you're pointing out, the dynamic between freedom and almost a dependency on the state vis-a-vis our desires for things such as security, or dare I say free breakfasts or free lunches. So what are you observing when it comes to the state of civil society in Canada? You're in touch with thousands of people across the country and other environments around the world. What are you observing? What is there a way to summarize that?
Yeah, the Bible has a phrase that we find often, and it says, "Wake up, the mighty men. Wake up, thou who sleeps." Now, there's a lot of different things you could use that for, but when life is good and things are okay, people begin to fall asleep at the wheel when it comes to what is going on around them. And interesting, I've been listening to a lot of podcasts by brilliant men and women who are atheists or at least agnostic. And I'm hearing something in their tone. They're saying, with the way the world has changed through COVID, and you can see it for decades before, I'm rethinking my stance on evil, that it's not just, a part of a human being. There's a dark side and a light side, which there, but that there is resident evil. There is something evil that they're re-looking at. Could there be a devil or some kind of evil that is here? And I think that when you, like, Jews and Christians both believe massively in evil. And I was listening to Dennis Prager, one of our brilliant men, and he has a show, and he was talking with some other men about the fact that when you look at well-established children, that when children understand that there is an evil in this world and a good, how better balanced they are when something goes wrong in their life, whether it's evil that happens through abuse or sickness or whatever. And I can't say it as well as he did, but he brought out that people need to be aware that there is evil, and that this evil will come through people. And Jesus put it this way. He said, that I am come that you might have life and more abundantly. And that literally means a quality you've never seen, that it's so high, and a quantity that's it's not, you can't count it. So this is the kind of life he wants us to have. But then he says, but the thief or the enemy comes to kill, steal, and destroy. So what's interesting in a follower of Christ life is that we believe that evil is out there. And so we must be alert. We must share the good news of the gospel. We must help people because, the Bible says, Jesus himself said he came to destroy the works of the devil. And so when you look at all the things that are going on, once you begin to have a biblical perspective on things, not only do you value everybody who disagrees with you, you want them to do well, you want to help them do well, and if they're open to it, you can share thoughts and talk back and forth and have great discussions, but also an awareness that all the time, somewhere, evil is going to try to break through. And so the new covenant teaches us how to live lives that keeps it at bay.
So that's actually a fascinating insight, because that was actually one of the questions I was going to ask you about is when you think of our civil society or culture and shared values, they're in many respects being undermined or quite frankly being attacked directly by foreign kind of ideologies. I think of kind of the toxicity, and I don't want to confuse people, but you think of things such as, quote, critical race theory or cultural Marxism that labels people under groups and not respecting individuals. Or it's also joined at the hip with things like postmodernism, where there is no truth. Like postmodernism really basically saying the only truth is kind of your own experience. I know I'm grossly oversimplifying this, but these are things that are very almost confusing for people, I think, in this culture. Yes. And if you don't believe in kind of a truth, and ironically, postmodernism, its assertion that there is no truth is actually asserting a truth, makes kind of a mockery of it. But the point is that if people are kind of in this mushy culture where we don't know what truth is, or even like biological sex as an example, do you think that is part of the challenge we face now in civil society? How do you look at that, Leon?
I totally agree with that. There's some of the wise proverbs would say, wisdom cries aloud in the streets. And wisdom is the application. It's the third step of you gain knowledge, you meditate and think for understanding for the area that you're looking at. And then wisdom is considered this aha moment that literally comes from the presence of God. But so if wisdom is crying aloud in the streets and no one's paying attention, then it means that people are gaining knowledge, and knowledge without wisdom is an absolute scary thing. A friend of mine had a 12-year-old daughter who won, this is a number of years ago, won in rifle competitions. She was the most expert shot, and at 12 she beat out all the full-grown men. And so she's incredibly skilled, gained knowledge about her body and memory and twitch and all the things it requires to shoot. But no one's going to hand her that gun and say, go on the streets and protect people now because you're the best, because there's knowledge there. But there's nowhere near enough wisdom. Yeah. And knowledge is exploding at such a huge rate in the world today that people tend to just quickly gravitate towards their knowledge, what they think. They listen to somebody, and then they just stay locked in this thinking. And wisdom is crying aloud in the streets. And another proverb says that wisdom is in the counsel of many. Well, why would you need many if they all think the same?
Exactly.
And so one of the most crucial issues is this ability in the public square to sit down and to graciously look at another person who completely disagrees with you and just to smile and go, I'm fascinated with the way you think. Let's talk and let's just speak truth from our perspective.
Right.
And in valuing each other. And in these kinds of chats and talks, it's amazing how wisdom rises up. And even if they begin to compete with their conflicting beliefs and where they sit with this knowledge, they walk away. And there's this development of wisdom. And so we live in a compartmentalized world where everything is being tribalized. Everyone's got their own little tribe, their own little group, and they're just fighting to be recognized. And we need to back off. And the very first thing we must do is respect and honor the people around us. And if you can get that, then you will listen and go, that's interesting. Keep talking to me about this.
Yeah,
I'd love to hear about that. So where does that come from? Now, here's what I think. I totally disagree with that. But now, and how would you spin that? And in this respect for one another, even friendships used to grow between people. And so our world is on a course of knowledge is doubling so fast. And the issue isn't that knowledge isn't going to keep, doubling, but do we have the wisdom of a society to handle all the things we can do? We think we can make a man out of a woman out of a man. We think that we can change this, we can change that. We think that, we can fly people all over. Like all of this knowledge, we need to take a step back and say we need to talk to one another and not allow leadership. And leadership is to protect this exchange of ideas and this ability to disagree in the marketplace and shake hands, and so that's a huge issue for me.
That's a great insight. So you're really challenging us to think about how we are, dare I say, graceful and respectful to each other and learn from each other. And we don't do this kind of typical trick of, quote, canceling each other or forbidding us to think certain acceptable thoughts and all the like. Is that right?
You know what? Weak leaders, I love leadership. I've studied it my entire life. Weak leaders must muzzle people who disagree with them because they don't have an ability to disagree with wisdom. And so they just shut down every dissenting voice. But wise leaders, I'll give you an example. When I go into a board meeting of one of the organizations that I run, or I go into a meeting of the department heads or, et cetera, and we're looking at things, or I've got an idea, I sit there, I look at each of them, and I've trained them this way, that I do not want you, when I have an idea, to just yes it all the way through. But in this room, I want you to find everything possible wrong. I want you to debate me. I want you to devil's advocate me. I want you to make me stand up and prove this new idea that I've got that's going to bring change to structures or systems or staffing, et cetera. I want you to take me on. And now, I want you to critique everything, but I don't want you to be critical. Big difference. And so I admire people who can sit down and critique and think through and find problems, because if I can find the problem in the department head meeting or in the boardroom, then I can be ready for it and solve it, rather than to loose this brand new idea on this organization or the people that we serve with it, and only to find later, the people who are hurt and the things that get broken because of it. So wise leaders desire conflict all around them. Conflict is everybody else creatively looking at this. Conflict is everybody else looking at the idea and then critiquing it with their reference and their history and their acumen. And so if you can do that as a leader, you have all of these brilliant people coming together with you. And then we'll also say, now let's look at the positive sides of this idea.
So what an exciting insight, Leon, to share, and really profoundly significant then in terms of understanding how we create a very high functioning civil society, including shared value and culture. If we have that respectful candor, but that's all under attack now, as you quote, cancel somebody that has unacceptable ideas, as we And it's profound because then we don't have the enlightenment anymore. We don't have the ability to come together and innovate, find truth, and move our society forward. I mean, it's really quite, everything's kind of at stake here now, isn't it?
Well, just because you can doesn't mean you should. Like our ability to put together bots and everything else on Twitter and cancel somebody out, just mess with them because they disagree. Yeah, there's a lot of different kinds of power today, and just because I can, should we? Like when people are completely sure they're right, you can go cool, but now let it be challenged by great minds around you, and if you're right, it'll stand the test of others disagreeing. And what I have found, when your idea is seen as, oh my, yes, it will have been changed to help it succeed. Like, here's the idea. Now, when should we implement it? How should we implement? Who should implement? Where should the money come from? Where should it flow first and after? There's so many decisions to make about this, or the things you're concerned about. Okay, that's a great concern. Maybe there's even better ways to solve that problem, but none of that is happening. And the average individual who is a citizen of a nation must require a stringent ability to disagree and to argue everything and to look at it and never be canceled, and unless these people are just outright lying, and even then, and I don't agree with, who needs free speech, but anyway, you're touching on some things that are passions.
You've made a very powerful argument for those shared values that have served civilization, quite frankly, well, of free speech and the rule of law and so many others. So I do want to shift a little bit more now to the world of action. And I think people will be fascinated to know that you're the CEO of the Miracle Channel. You're also the host of Return to Reason. I want to get to that in a moment. But what inspired you to kind of be involved in significant media ventures? And can you tell us more about them?
One of the things I've noticed in my life is that people are good at starting things, but they're not good at giving it life, ongoing through all of the storms and the seasons of life. And so, for example, as a pastor, I've had 1, 2, 3, 4. I've had 4 separate churches just given to me, just saying, they're being, there's not enough people to run them. It's in a charity.
Given to the church.
Yeah. Wow. Would you take it, and would you make it work? And so we did. And there were other things have been offered to me that I've said no to because it doesn't fit in our wheelhouse or not in the purpose and the vision that we have. And so there was a Christian channel that was going through the same thing. It had hit the rocks and other things were going wrong. They'd gone through different CEOs and it had just dropped. It was just about bankrupt. And one of the board members was watching the organizations across Canada and looking. And he told me, brilliant man from the business world, he just said, we were looking for someone who'd understand the values of it, but then knew how to steer it through the uncertain times that are still ahead and keep growing it. And so he said, we'd like you to take it. Would you take this channel? That it was a very rare license in Canada. And then he was very good. He talked about why it's so important that if, in our world today, if you're not on video, on television, social media, etc., you really don't have a voice because it's the way every emerging generation is communicating. And so we did. I stepped in as the CEO, and it was literally when I stepped into the organization and realized how bad it was. We had to find finances. I had to replace the vast majority of all the staff. I think at one time there was up to 70 staff there. And then we had to dive in and look at what were we good at, what weren't we good at. And I began to bring people from my world in and putting them in there. And then the things they said were impossible, like, television's shot its best shot. It's on its way out. They were on a couple satellites across the nation, but you'll never get on cable. You'll never get on any of these. And so it took us about a year to 2 years to really clean this thing up so that it began to be, focused. And it just exploded. It began to go on cable stations in every province. And then we began to go around the world in English, and then other languages and Spanish and Russian. And it began to have a life of its own when excellence was brought to it. And by the way, I did not have a lot of knowledge of how to turn a television station around, but I had just the knowledge of leadership, which means when you don't know something, find someone who does, and get them into your meetings and rooms and hire them. And so that thing took off. And then we began to recognize the power, the amazing emails and letters we would get from people, because we would help them with everyday life. And the programs on there would be all about things they were going through. And then we got another channel that we're now working on. Then we recognized how crazy some of the video on demands were. And so we began to develop our own video on demand platform, especially for children. We found that when you look at the video on demand for children, that the cartoons and a lot of the things that were going on, they were eroding the values of Judeo-Christian principles. And they were teaching things, and you couldn't see it until your worldview began to be affected. And so we wanted a place where people could be safe, where a mom could go and find all of these shows for her kids and know that within those shows would be taught respect for the elderly and for parents, would be taught their value and their identity as a person, that God knew what he was doing when he made them. And so that is now on the go as well. And everything is just going in a great direction. And it seems like every few months, new things are being added. It's like good things are attracted to movement.
Right.
Get moving.
Wow. What an inspiring story. So, and by the way, the streaming service is called Corco. Is that correct?
Yeah. CORCO, Corco Plus.
And you can download the app. So you are the host of Return to Reason. It's a great program. Congratulations on the first season, and you're poised to start the second season. And we wanted to play the trailer for as we look to the second season.
We all have a duty to get informed. We need reliable facts, truth, and perspective, a place where common sense and critical thinking are championed. We deserve to have the whole story. On this brand new season of Return to Reason, I'll dive deep into crucial topics, engage in conversation, and offer a wise opinion. You'll feel equipped to make up your own mind on the issues that really matter. Experience Return to Reason better than ever this fall.
Wow, what a terrific trailer. So why did you start Return to Reason?
My life radically changed as a pastor a number of years ago, to keep a mega church where thousands attend, and then we have our school and hundreds of students, and then to keep it going, you had to become very good at understanding the times, the culture, the people that we're in, Canada, etc. But I was predominantly a pastor. And then one day I was training pastors from all across Australia. And a gentleman walked up to me and he said, "I'm listening to you teach leadership to them." He said, "Could you do that to a purely secular audience and not talk about the Bible?" Because he was reaching a ton of leaders in the business world, especially. It was predominantly the business world. And I said, I'd have no problem doing that. And he says, "Would you?" And so I thought about this and I said, I would like to do that. And so I flew into Australia for a conference and then Hawaii for a conference where people were paying like $4,000 a seat, and they would fly in, the world's top speakers to speak to them in regards to succeeding in life, etc. And so I was a little bit antsy because I so admire the Bible, because all my leadership principles and the things I've learned come from this unique book, but I'm not religious. And so I had to kind of sit down and go through all the principles. So every principle I taught was from the Bible. Every issue that I taught about how to solve problems, how to be a leader, how to handle managers, how to create a culture in your organization, which is one of the most important things. I just went there and just taught them all that, and didn't ever reference the Bible. Well, what was interesting to me, and I think it was good for me, was the people just went off on all this stuff. They loved it. They were excited about it. And we never told them that I was a pastor. And then I did a second one. And so the reason and there's a lot of things that happened there, but the reason I'm looking at that was I began to recognize that people who have not grown up to respect the Bible as a book to help relationships, generations, they've been hurt by it, maybe by someone screaming at them, pointing their finger, kicked out of church because they were divorced, or some of the dumb things that we see going on. And I recognize that until they get a new look at what I so treasure, that I needed to be able to explain things without biblical referencing. And so this was our kind of first kick at the cat, called Return to Reason, where I didn't use my pastoral knowledge, my knowledge of the Bible, or I am, but I'm not referring to it so that people feel like I'm preaching at them.
That's fascinating.
And then the second thing that we wanted was, we just noticed that mainstream media was absolutely compromised. In fact, things that I knew because of my relationships in government, my relationships in business and healthcare, and around the world that I've built over the years, would be telling me from the inside track something completely different. And yet the news would be literally, if you tell the truth, but not the whole truth, that's where rat poison comes from. A little bit of good, add some poison, and you can guide people and direct people anywhere you want. And I kind of pushed back a little bit, because everywhere I would go, people would see me do stuff on leadership as I would teach it from a biblical perspective, but it was for everybody. It was for business leaders, and they would come to these conferences. And so we just decided to do this show where we could have our the television crew, the producers, the researchers, begin to study and look and say, is there anything going on here that the whole truth is not being told? And then let's interview people, the best. Let's interview the brightest minds in this area, or the person in the middle that is a witness to what's going on. And then as we do that, we'll let them bring the knowledge and the wisdom. But then often on the shows, if I don't feel they clarified it, I'll share a conclusion thought. And I just found that everywhere I went, people would be asked, well, Leon, I need to know what do you think about this? What do you think about this? And, and one-on-one, I'd have a chance to talk and share from, just my past of leadership and taking organizations through these times. And so that was what we wanted to do with it, was to really have a safe place where if you were to say, where would I go to get the truth, the whole truth, and not somebody trying to skew it or someone trying to manipulate me. The only difference between manipulation and influence when it comes to leadership is just motive.
Wow.
Yeah. And so we must maintain the right motive of sharing these programs, because great leaders can completely turn it around and manipulate with it, and manipulating people is wrong, rather than influence people, teach them, train them, equip them to be freer, more free, with more wisdom, being able to rise to greater heights with their gifts and abilities. So that's
precisely. Well, bravo on you, Leon, for that vision for Return to Reason. And what's your media social handle for Return to Reason?
If they want to see the Return to Reason show, they can go returntoreason.tv, And then it's also on my website at leonfontaine.com. But there's a host of other stuff there too, other television series that we've done, and et cetera. But if you want just the Return to Reason, just go to returntoreason.tv.
Excellent. So we look forward to the second season. And now I'd like to shift a little bit as we kind of move towards the end of the program around the state of media in the country and then action. But I want to just highlight that within the Miracle Channel, you do have a news team. And I am fascinated by the story of Bridge City News. And I'm going to go back earlier this year, as you recall so well, January, February, when you saw the genesis of the protesters, the truckers, start in British Columbia on their way on a national voyage to Ottawa, protesting the introduction of the federal government's vaccine mandates on arguably a group of people that really there was no problem. And certainly the kind of revelations in the legal process show that there was no evidence. It was really a political, cynical, dare I say, political wedge strategy. But you decided pretty early on, Leon, to send a dynamic team of people from the channel to Ottawa to actually report on the ground what was going on. Why did you decide to do that?
You know, during COVID, there began to be this darkness, this sense of no hope that began to creep into our cities and our nation. And when we began to hear about these truckers who simply wanted to go to Ottawa and share their thoughts about this because of the things that were going on, we grabbed a 3-man team, all of them, 2 of them well-versed in camera work and editing, and then a third person. And they literally hopped in a vehicle and drove, and they drove with the truckers as they crossed all the way from Winnipeg to Ottawa. And they were blown away by how many people were standing on the roads waving, and the sense of hope that began to come. And it wasn't being shown on mainstream media. And they were saying, Leon, like, there are thousands upon thousands of people at all these stops and lining the highways and waving us on, which wasn't the tone we were getting from the mainstream media, that we got a few truckers and we don't agree with their thinking. And I mean, even leadership was saying all this stuff, but I was getting a completely different. So when they got to Ottawa, what we did was we literally had them going out during the day to interview people, and those interviews were put on Bridge City News. And then what I did was, on my social media, we would go live, and I put a TV camera and a reporter, and we would walk live time amongst the truckers, and they would see the police. Sometimes we would see police coming in and stopping something. We'd see the truckers and what they were doing, and they simply walked. And so every night, and I think it was 3 weeks straight until this began to end, they would simply walk, and we would pick a time around supper time. And they would walk the streets of all these trucks. They would walk where the police were stationed and what was going on. And we would talk about what the news was saying. And then we would let the world walk with us amongst the truckers. And we would see things like a mainstream news team with their cameras sitting on a bridge pointed at 3 skaters or a couple of guys playing hockey. And that would be their story. But if you turned that camera the other way and looked, you would see this massive amount of people who were in unity, who were valuing one another, which the Bible calls love, and they were feeding one another and looking after one another. But they would just look for something that would demean it, like it's just some guys playing hockey.
So just let me clarify. So you're saying that not only did you see an incredible kind of organic movement of people coming together peacefully, you observed the mainstream media in all this, and you noticed a really, frankly, a deliberate attempt to not tell the story, the basic facts of what was going on. Did that surprise you?
It did, because these 3 men were I mean, this is, they're going for news. Go get news. And
Yeah.
they were told, get the negative news, find the
Exactly.
problems,
Yeah.
find the issues. So they would be out walking all these streets and around the parliament. And then all of a sudden we watch the news and, oh, there's a flag for this. We go, did you see it? Well, you guys walked around all day. You were back and forth and everything.
Yeah.
No. Well, did you see this? Now they're announcing this, that a bunch of guys
Right.
created this. No. And we were there back and forth the entire
you were
time.
aggressively going after those negative stories, as I recall, like even the stories that were planted about people stealing food from a food bank and all kinds of things. And obviously nothing is perfect, but it's just, it's incredible the amount of misinformation that was deliberately put out there, isn't it? That's the punchline.
They absolutely had a mission. The mission was minimize the truckers, demonize the truckers, find the 2% whatever weirdos that were there, which are everywhere all the time,
Right.
and do everything in our power to grab these images. You see, the reason news is so powerful is because unless you're there personally, you see the image and you're convinced, because you're not just hearing the report, you're seeing it. And it's so easy to manipulate an entire nation to the rhetoric that is needed. And the only way that we'll be able to get truth is that groups like us, and there are many others out there, and I just champion their cause, to get in there and to shoot and interview. By shooting, I mean shooting cameras and interviewing and getting it on video and let it run longer than usual. And if we don't, then, people got to realize, even those who are all for it, that you've got to be careful. You're an intelligent person. You want the whole truth and you want freedom. And when you put those two together, we've got hope.
No, it's really quite fascinating. So strategically then, if you look at the media landscape then, Leon, is your sense that the independent media, dare I say, is growing rapidly? I know that Bridge City News, you experienced what kind of growth out of that?
Yeah, I forget the numbers. They were phenomenal. They just burst up. And people began to follow, especially when they realized that we weren't just giving an opinion, but that we would take a solid hour and we would walk you through the scene. And then we would be looking for the comments. And truckers who were there, people who were there would be watching, and they would be telling us. And so I'd have a team around me in front of my desk and the team out there saying, oh, we've got a trucker over on this street saying they're arresting somebody right now if you want to go see that. Someone else say, well, I heard that this bridge has now been shut down. And so we could get a camera on that. And so people were helping us as we were looking for truth. They're sending it to us. Go here, go there. We've got a whole squad of policemen now moving on a truck over here. We have no idea why. And it was a wonderful thing, the collaboration of people encouraging each other to get truth out there. And I think the news has changed. Like, it's very antiquated for mainstream media. And the emerging generations now, I mean, it's interesting, if I go by a fire and I see smoke and flames around an area, but I don't know what's going on, I just quickly go to one of the Instagrams or Twitter, for example, and just, fire on Henderson. And already people will have been gathering the news and sending it there. I just passed it. I see 4 fire trucks and there's 17 people, there's 3 laying on the ground. Man, it's just, with what we're doing today, it is impossible. It really is impossible to hold truth back for very long.
But that's a very important lesson then for these state actors who want to play games to manipulate information. Ultimately, the truth will seep out because there are just so many eyes and ears given the technology of our era, where people do reporting. Everybody becomes a reporter. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, everybody becomes a reporter, and if they can find news agencies like us or others, and they can send it to us for a much bigger audience, they will, and we'll look at it. And so the world has changed when it comes to mainstream media. I will say that their time has come. I think they could keep going for a lot of years yet and find a group that will keep going to them for one reason or the other, but people who will wake up and recognize that people who disagree with you are not your enemy. People who think differently than you are not your enemy. And stop listening to the woke crowd. Stop listening to leaders who want to manipulate the narrative. People just need to wise up. We really need a resurgence of real leadership. And I'll just say this comment before your next question, and that is that leadership is such powerful influence, but we must require from our leaders that they lead for the people that they lead. It's servant leadership, that you serve the people that you lead. It's not about your next term. It's not about you making more money. The Bible teaches us the love of money is the root of all evil. And through the COVID pandemic, as people saw opportunities to sell things, to make things, and they all jumped on board, and countries jumped on board to further their cause, in that geopolitical realm. All this stuff, it's about the love of money, the love of power. We've got to begin to find men and women. And there are no perfect people, but we must begin to hold them to a higher cause that truth. The whole truth. And when we find them doing something wrong, it's a big deal. It's not just, well, it's my party or it's the guy that I voted for, so I don't care as long as he gets in again. No, it'll always come back to hurt you. Biblically, a proverb and a teaching in the word is that kings, which was their word for leaders, they control everything. They are making decisions that is going to bring pain to bear, or it's going to bring freedom and joy into your life. And much of it is down the road a few years where no one wants to look. I mean, the ability to lead is the ability to almost be prophetic. You have to understand the past. You have to keep your eyes on the present, and you need to superimpose what you've learned on the future and at least take a guess as to where things could go. Almost nobody does that foresight, this development of foresight.
Well said. So, Leon, as you look to the future, how would you summarize your sense of hope and what people can do in terms of action? Is there an easy answer?
I think in a general overall case, that pendulum swing. And when a country, a healthcare or whatever, when something swings as a pendulum and it goes too far in one direction, people's eyeballs, because it's not in center, it's gone far too far. And yet we can study history and know that the pendulum will come back. And when it comes back, again, if we're not careful, it goes to this extreme. And so we just see this life going through these extremes. And so in one way, that's good, because when I see, socialism, Marxism, there's all these different words where we're willing to give up our rights and freedoms. They're always going to take enough rope to hang themselves in the public square. And then people are going to go, oh my, and it begins to come back. And so what I see them doing out there is gone so far that it's waking up more and more and more people. And then the second thought that I would have would be that if we all quickly wake up and begin to speak up, stop allowing someone to shut you down, and have an opinion. Now do it with respect. Speak truth in love, or speak truth valuing the people that you disagree with. If everybody will start doing that, it will not take long to get things back in a more healthy mode. But if we can be shut up, if we can be made to be quiet, then evil will prevail. Evil thoughts, thinking, systems, structures, leaders will all prevail. And so we will have to all speak up, even if it costs us something. I so admire the men and women that we interview on Return to Reason. Brilliant doctors, lawyers, leaders, because they refuse to back away from truth. And when they stood up, it cost them jobs, it cost them their friendships. But in my grandfather's day, it was a crazy thought. that you would go against your own integrity. That's all you had. It was a weird thought to think that you wouldn't be honorable and integrous and a man of your word. I mean, that made you just the crookiest crook going. That you were at the bottom of the pile. You were the guy that everybody wouldn't even deal with. And yet today, we allow it everywhere as long as it's, going to meet some little need for us. And so we all need to wake up. We all need to speak up and use wisdom.
Thank you so much, Leon Fontaine, leader extraordinaire, wearing so many hats within civil society. We want to thank you so much for joining us today and being such an advocate for reason and wisdom and for knowledge and for freedom. Thank you very much, Leon.
Thank you for having me, David.
Well, thank you, everyone, for joining us today for that incredible discussion with Leon Fontaine. I want to thank all of you, friends of Frontier, who joined us today. I encourage you to keep involved with Frontier, and we welcome your comments. Be sure to join us on September the 30th on Policy on the Frontier. We're delighted to announce that we have 2 of the 3 authors of the Great Barrington Declaration, Dr. Jay Bhattacharya and Dr. Martin Kulldorff. This will be a far-reaching discussion on their experience as scientists who played such a key role on the world stage and the lessons learned from COVID-19 and where do we go from here. Frontier does not accept any government funding, and your support, your donations make our mission possible, so thank you. And that's it for today. And remember, without open discussion and debate, you're not thinking, and nor are you free. Keep asking good questions and do not be afraid. And on behalf of all of us at Frontier, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for watching Leaders on the Frontier. We're a nonpartisan think tank. We explore ideas, policy, and practical solutions that can make a difference in the lives of Canadians. We do not accept any government funding. We work for you. Thank you for supporting Frontier. Visit fcpp.org to give. While you're there, be sure to check out our latest articles and research. Without open discussion and debate, you're not thinking, nor are you free. Comment below. We'd love for you to join the conversation.